Trespass to person and false imprisonment. A comprehensive legal analysis 3000 words 1. Introduction to false imprisonment. False imprisonment stands as one of the most fundamental violations of personal liberty and legal systems worldwide. This dual nature offense functions both as a civil wrong tort and a criminal act, providing victims with multiple avenues for redress. At its core, false imprisonment represents society's commitment to protecting individual freedom of movement, a right so essential that most constitutional frameworks enumerate it explicitly. The tort's intentional nature distinguishes it from negligent confinement cases, requiring plaintiffs to demonstrate purposeful restraint. What makes false imprisonment particularly noteworthy in tort law is its unusual burden of proof structure. Unlike most civil matters, where plaintiffs must prove their case, false imprisonment shifts the evidentiary burden to defendants to justify the confinement. This reversal reflects the law's special protection of personal liberty and recognizes the inherent power imbalance in confinement situations. Modern applications extend beyond physical restraints to include psychological coercion and technological confinement, adapting traditional principles to contemporary challenges. 2. Legal definition and scope. Jurisdictions universally define false imprisonment as the unlawful, intentional restraint of a person's freedom of movement without legal justification. This restraint need not involve physical barriers or traditional jail cells. Confinement in vehicles, rooms, or even open spaces can qualify if egress is effectively prevented. The tort recognizes several unique aspects that broaden its protective scope. First, physical force isn't mandatory. Credible threats of violence or other coercive measures suffice to establish confinement. Second, the victim's awareness during imprisonment isn't required. Someone drugged and confined could still bring a claim upon discovering the violation. Third, duration proves irrelevant legally. Even minutes of unjustified restraint can support a claim. Finally, no formal arrest procedure need occur. Any complete deprivation of liberty meets the standard. These expansive parameters ensure the tort remains adaptable to various confinement scenarios, from unlawful citizens' arrests to sophisticated psychological manipulation preventing movement. Courts increasingly apply these principles to novel situations like digital confinement through technological means or coercive workplace environments. 3. Types of imprisonment in law. Legal systems recognize two primary forms of imprisonment with distinct characteristics. Actual imprisonment represents the formal deprivation of liberty following state-sanctioned processes. This includes incarceration after criminal conviction, pretrial detention meeting legal standards, civil confinement for contempt or other judicial orders. 3. Types of imprisonment in law. Legal systems recognize two primary forms of imprisonment with distinct characteristics. Actual imprisonment represents the formal deprivation of liberty following state-sanctioned processes. This includes incarceration after criminal conviction, pretrial detention meeting legal standards, civil confinement for contempt or other judicial orders. Valid actual imprisonment requires strict adherence to due process protections at each stage, from arrest procedures to sentencing guidelines. Constitutional safeguards like habeas corpus review and prohibition of cruel, unusual punishment constrain this power. Constructive imprisonment covers confinement occurring outside formal detention systems. Its hallmarks include psychological rather than physical restraint mechanisms, subtle coercion preventing free movement, often occurring in asymmetric power relationships. Common scenarios involve employers preventing employees from leaving workplaces, medical facilities restraining patients beyond clinical necessity, or individuals using threats to control others' movements. Courts examine the totality of circumstances to determine whether a reasonable person would feel free to leave. The critical distinction lies in lawfulness. While actual imprisonment follows legal processes, constructive imprisonment by definition lacks proper authorization. However, the line blurs in cases like mental health holds or protective custody situations where officials may exceed their authority. 4. Essential legal elements. Successful false imprisonment claims must prove two core elements: complete restraint of liberty. The confinement must prevent departure in all directions, creating a bounded area from which the victim cannot escape. Partial restraints blocking one exit while others remain available generally don't qualify. Modern interpretations consider physical barriers, locked doors, handcuffs, psychological barriers, threats of harm, technological controls, disabled vehicles, smart home locks. Notably, The restraint must be total, it need not be successful. Attempted confinement where escape occurs may still be actionable. Unlawfulness of restraint. The confinement must lack legal justification. This involves analyzing absence of proper arrest authority, violations of procedural requirements, excessive duration beyond authorized periods. Disproportionate force used in effecting restraint. Lawfulness depends on the specific authority invoked, arrest warrants, citizens' arrest statutes, etc., and strict compliance with their terms. 5. Trespass to person framework. False imprisonment exists within the broader legal category of trespass to person, intentional interferences with bodily integrity and freedom. This umbrella includes assault, creating reasonable apprehension of imminent harmful contact through threats or gestures. No physical impact required. Battery, intentional harmful or offensive physical contact, extends to indirect contact, projectiles, spitting, and doesn't require injury. Wounding, mayhem, maiming. Graduated categories of bodily harm with historical roots in combat readiness laws, now addressing permanent injuries and disfigurement. False imprisonment's unique position in this framework protects freedom of movement rather than physical integrity, though the torts often overlap in practice. For example, unlawful arrests involving both confinement and battery. 6. Legal defenses. Defendants may raise several affirmative defenses. Partial restraint, demonstrating available escape routes, or imperfect confinement can defeat claims. Courts examine whether a reasonable person would perceive exit options. Voluntary consent. Valid consent requires knowledge of what's being consented to. Absence of coercion. Legal capacity to consent. Consent may be withdrawn at any time, terminating lawfulness. Lawful authority properly exercised. Arrest powers without warrants. Citizens' arrest privileges. Emergency detention authority must precisely follow statutory requirements. Legal justification, including valid court orders, statutory quarantine powers, school disciplinary authority. Scope and duration must match authorization. 7. Available remedies. Victims may pursue multiple forms of relief. Habeas corpus. The ancient writ compelling justification for detention remains the swiftest path to freedom from ongoing confinement. Compensatory damages. Courts award money for lost income during confinement, medical, psychological treatment costs, pain and suffering, reputational harm. Punitive damages. In egregious cases, additional sums punish wrongdoers and deter future violations. Injunctive relief. Court orders preventing recurring confinement, especially valuable in institutional or workplace contexts. 8. Contemporary issues. Modern challenges include digital confinement through technology controls, psychological coercion techniques, workplace freedom restrictions, cross-border jurisdictional questions, institutional liability standards. Courts continually adapt traditional principles to these new contexts, while preserving the tort's core protection of personal liberty. 9. Conclusion. False imprisonment law remains a dynamic and essential component of personal liberty protections. Its evolution continues as society develops new forms of interaction and control, with courts applying centuries-old principles to modern confinement scenarios. The tort's flexibility ensures its continued relevance in safeguarding what democratic societies value most: individual freedom from arbitrary restraint.